is the Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for joining us. Presentation, Herbert. The first question is what's the role of the family office in these entrepreneur ecosystems? Where do you see them playing best?
I think family offices, if you've got a geographical focus, or if you've got a technology sector focus, you could do a quick search in your region. If you're investing in a company, let's say in North Carolina, as a part of your due diligence, understand the accelerators in the community. Understand the funders in the communities. I love family offices and how they invest, but make an attempt to understand the VCs in the community. If you're doing early stage investing, understand the VCs that are doing early stage investing as well. I will say that a request from a family office to a VC to co-invest is much better than an entrepreneur trying to get a VC to invest, because, as a family office, you're telling the VC, I have skin in the game and I would like for you to co-invest. I think helping these folks understand, helping them identify additional funding would be helpful. From my perspective, if what I have done with the companies that I've invested in is I've made sure that I understand, as an example, I had a conversation with one founder who's not quite left their full-time job yet. And I said, well, what is the floor that you need for a salary? And let's say that's $100,000. So my goal then is to help them, go after that next round. If it's $100,000 a year, I know that the floor is $300,000, so that I could tell that entrepreneur, you need to, okay, I'm going to make sure you're funded for 3 years, so $300,000 plus whatever they need in operational. Let's just say that's another $300,000. So it's easier for me to reach out to VCs, angel groups, institutional investors, SPV, whatever you want to do, and help source that next round of funding for that entrepreneur so that they can focus on their business. Because as most of you probably realize, fundraising is hard. And fundraising is a skill and a talent that most founders don't have. They just know how to do that thing that they do. So they're horrible at fundraising. So I would encourage family offices, as a part of your due diligence, ask yourself, are there resources or connections I have in the funding space that I can engage to say, hey, I'm going to do this. Will you co-invest if we hit X milestone?
One thing family offices do for the ecosystem is they fund emerging managers in the VC space. Pension funds, foundations don't usually do that. They have to have 10, 15-year track record before those guys come in. But where have you seen the family offices impact on the emerging manager side?
I will say with family offices, you may have an emerging manager come to you and say, hey, my minimum is, if we're looking at the minimum investment is $500,000. I would say just blow past that and, set your own minimums. If you've got $100,000 to commit to an emerging manager, just counter offer. I don't care what the docs say. Just counter offer that, hey, we'll commit at 100,000, or we'll give you 50, assuming that you find another 50 to match this, right? What you're doing is changing the narrative for that emerging manager. Now they're not calling Hall and saying, hey, Hall, I need $5 million. They're calling Hall and saying, hey, XYZ family office has committed 50. Can I get you coming for 50 or 100 to match that or 2X that? That's a completely different conversation, because now they've got a little bit of social capital, a little bit of reputational capital when they're having the conversation.
Great. One comment I hear from family offices is that they don't have a deal flow process in place. So funding startups is a bit of a challenge. What are some strategies to get around that?
I would say find an emerging manager that you could bolt on to their due diligence process. If, a lot of times folks will ask, well, what is your pipeline? I think every emerging manager should have a pipeline, if you will. And I think because most family offices may have someone who's operationally sound, if you will, and that doesn't mean that the emerging managers. So I would say bolt on to a few emerging managers. And quite frankly, If you ask them to send you a copy of their due diligence process in a Word document, I would say just deconstruct that and create your own due diligence, because you're, as a family office, you probably have tons of, fund managers calling you. Just ask them, hey, send me a sample of your due diligence process. And then just look at those and create one yourself.
Right. Well, most family offices have impact investing as a part of their thesis, but when we talk to startups and we ask for their impact, say graduating students, we often get the answer back, we've done 3 students so far, or 5. How does the family office review that and say this is going to have big impact someday versus it is always going to be 3 to 5? How do you assess impact, I guess, at the early stage?
I would recommend, if you can, have conversations with the individuals. And when I say the individuals, if they're asking for, if you want to know the impact, and say, well, we've invested in these 3 women founders, right? It's more important to understand the how instead of the what, if you will. So if you're having conversation, if they say we've invested in 3 female founders, ask them if you can have a conversation with them. And then talk to these founders about what was the process like. If you find that the process was arduous and bumpy, then they don't have a process that's scalable. But if you find that, that entrepreneur says, well, I had 4 or 5 calls with her. He asked me questions. He helped me identify potential board members. He talked to me about a productization and commercialization specialist. So those are the things that you're looking for, right? Not that, my God, it took 9 months for me to get $50,000 from this dude. That's telling me that they're not truly invested in impact. No entrepreneur, when an entrepreneur is looking for funding, they're not looking for a 6-month process. They're looking for some signaling that says that you will be engaged.
Great. So tell us more about your fund and what you're doing there with your group and what success you've seen so far.
Early on, my target initially was, underserved, underrepresented founders in the Southeast. And quite frankly, what I found is that there weren't a lot of venture backable, underserved, underrepresented businesses in the region. There are a lot of Main Street businesses that needed like $20,000 or less to help them hit velocity. And when I say hit velocity, these companies would probably never get above 500,000 or $1 million, right? But they would create a sustainable living wage for these entrepreneurs, and you can get 18 to 25% of your money. What I've done instead is partnered with a federally funded research and development center, a MITRE, in conversations with others and identified IP that has a commercial use. I mentioned the Haruki platform. That's IP that came out of the federally funded research and development center. And then the other one, Nexus RFP, that came out of them as well. And so I just reverse engineered the process, identified the business, and then recruited the founders and brought all the founders in. We've got 8 founders now that we've recruited in. There's a founding CEO. And as I said earlier, that scaffolding, just creating that scaffolding. I'll just, with Nexus RFP, we got a patent attorney, a Filipino African-American woman that's actually going to be running that as the CEO. And then we've got 2 other African-American males as founders. But bringing her in, partnering with a product and commercialization specialist, connecting them with a bookkeeper and an accounting firm that's setting up the financials, training, partner with a law firm. Most of these folks, they don't know what a cap table is. They don't know what a term sheet is. So partner with a law firm that's educating them on all of these things as well, and creating a go-to-market strategy, helping them identify what the support structure looks like. And that's been successful to me. I've got a couple of companies in due diligence now that they're revenue generating, but again, they're startups and they lack that scaffolding needed to help them hit velocity. And when I say hit velocity, all the companies that we're investing in, they'll all generate, a couple $1 million here, within 24 to 36 months.
Great. Well, appreciate the update there, Herbert. Thanks so much for a great presentation. We're at the end of our time, and we'll connect you with people in the audience who would like to learn more about the work you're doing there as well. With that, let's go ahead and switch over to our first presenter today. We have Mark Deschamps of Bioxos, who will be pitching first. Each company gets 10 minutes to pitch, 5 minutes for Q&A. And so please post those in the chat box if you have any questions. And with that, let's go ahead and bring up Mark first. Mark, we see your slides, so kick off whenever you're
That's it.
ready.
Thank you, Al. And thank you for the great presentation, Herbert. Before, I worked personally also in an ecosystem, so I understood very well your points. So Bioxodus is a biotech company, and the aim of our biotech company is really to bring a new hope, a breakthrough hope for patients affected by stroke. I will go back on the stroke in a while. So the mission is really to develop therapies for a wide range of thromboinflammatory indication. The first one, as you understood, is stroke. So BIOX-101, our first compound, is a first-in-class treatment, and we are dedicated this first-in-class treatment for the first indication, which is intracerebral hemorrhage. We are already in a phase 2A clinical trial, so-called BIRCH trial. It is an open-label control trial. And we are going to produce in a couple of months the first interim data, so the first clinical data among patients. And in parallel, we are also submitting actually for orphan drug designation because, and again, I will go back on that, stroke is very prevalent in the population, but hemorrhagic stroke is by far less. And in Europe and in US, it is an orphan disease. And so we submitted for both FDA and EMA recently, and we expect a decision by the end of the first quarter. Alors, what is particular to this first compound, BIOX-101? It's coming from a platform. Sorry for that. So I have something in my screen. Voila. So, from a platform coming actually from the tick saliva. If you understand what the tick is doing, the tick is the insect staying in the host of the animal. However, the tick is not seen and rejected by the immune system. And on top of that, the tick is keeping the blood liquid to continue to eat the blood and do the reproductory cycle. And so after a long research at the Free University of Brussels, Belgium, so a sequence was identified, which is a sequence of small proteins, 67 amino acids. And based on that, we could develop not only the first indication, but also other indication like ischemic stroke, or other thromboinflammatory indication. And we have strong intellectual property portfolio and a very evergreen strategy for IP. Alors, we are a team of seasoned executives. Personally, I spent more than 30 years at GlaxoSmithKline, either in Belgium or in London at the HQ, managing companies in Europe and managing commercial operations. And we have an extensive experience in advancing drugs from discovery to market because the chief medical officer is coming from Roche and spent 20 years actually of his life in doing that. Currently, the company is in a Series A extension. So the fundraising is ongoing and we want to continue to fund the phase 2A, but also to anticipate the phase 2B. Phase 2B will be an efficacy trial. And the Series B, which is supposed to fund actually the full phase 2B and the new indication, will start in Q2 this year. And the company raised to date 34 million euros, so let's say $36 million since the creation. So, as I said, we have the possibility to develop not only the first indication, but also other indication with BIOX-101. We are also looking to develop BIOX-102, which will be a long-acting formulation, and BIOX-201, because I will go back again on that. We have a very, very strong anti-inflammatory activity with this compound, and we would like to continue to focus the development on acute and chronic inflammatory disease as well. So coming back to stroke, stroke is considered as the second leading cause of death and disability around the world. And this is a neglected disease generating a lot of burden, not just on the patient and the family, but as you can imagine, a lot of cost also for the healthcare system. And there are two types of stroke. The one which is the primary objective of the company is hemorrhagic stroke, which is due to a rupture of a blood vessels in the brain. It's only 13% of the cases in US and in Europe, but responsible for 40% of all stroke-related deaths. And there is absolutely no indicated treatment, no specific treatment currently available to help the patient to avoid going too far, actually, with neuronal death and damages in the brain. And on top of that, what we are focusing, the first indication, intracerebral hemorrhage, is the most common type. Next to that, you have ischemic stroke. Most of the time when you hear about stroke, it is an ischemic stroke. Because again, in US and in Europe, it's 87% of all strokes. But there is a treatment, standard of care, alteplase for thrombolysis, dissolving blood clots, or if it is too late, so a surgery to take the clots out of the brain. And the last unmet medical need for ischemic stroke is the prevention of secondary hemorrhage and ischemic lesions. So we are focusing on intracerebral hemorrhage, so hemorrhagic stroke. And if you look to the milestone, the near-term milestone, so we are working on the first interim report, so the first clinical data among patients, and we'll have this report by Q1, end of Q1 this year. The clinical trial will continue to enroll until the end of this Q1 as well. We will generate the second interim analysis after the full enrollment. And as I said, we expect FDA and EMA decision or orphan drug designation also by the end of this first quarter. Once we will have orphan drug designation status or decision on that, we will move to FDA and EMA to discuss fast track approval and prime application in Europe because, again, there is nothing to treat the patient, nothing available. So we might, after the phase 2B, end up with a conditional marketing approval. Next to that, we would like with the Series B to cover the development of BIOX-101 in ICH for the phase 2B, potentially the pivotal efficacy trial, but also to move the new indication also in the preclinical stage and to continue to develop our new compound in acute and chronic inflammatory disease. To come back on the mode of action BIOX-101, and again, the fact that it is a protein identified, it's not an extract of the saliva of the tick, it is a sequence identified in the saliva. We combine very interesting activities, and that's a unique mode of action. On one end, we have an anti-inflammatory effect because we inhibit actually the neutrophil, either the migration, but also the activation and the release of the net, so-called the netosis, which is very lethal for the neurons. And we have an anti-clotting effect, so we could prevent the secondary, let's say, ischemia in the brain because around the hemorrhage, we have formation of small blood clots, which are going to generate further ischemia in the brain. We can prevent because we inhibit the factor 11 activated and factor 12 activated, but without increasing the bleeding risk. Patient is coming with an hemorrhage. You don't want to increase the hemorrhage when he's coming to the hospitals, but with our compound, we can prevent actually the neuroinflammatory cascade and prevent the formation of the blood clots, but without generating further bleeding. And that's what we have demonstrated actually in preclinical model. So I don't want to go into the details, but just look to the left-hand side of the slide. In this specific ICH model, murine model, we validated the safety profile, no increase of hemorrhage, no increase of edema. We demonstrated a clear anti-inflammatory effect, so we prevent the infiltration and the activation of the neutrophil. Again, this white blood cell is coming after 4 to 6 hours on the site of the hemorrhage. Protective effect on the neuron, so we decrease the neuronal death in the area of the hemorrhage, which is very key for helping patients to recover faster and better. Functional outcomes is not yet available because we are going to present the data to the Stroke Congress in Los Angeles next week. But we have a positive effect on the functional outcomes, and we demonstrated also the antithrombotic activity in this model, but also in a lot of other models. So going back to the pathophysiology of ICH, the patient is coming to the hospital with primary brain injury, with the hemorrhage. We can't do anything about that. But what the physicians can do for the patient today is to prevent the secondary brain injury, again, which are happening after 6 to 72 hours, up to 72 hours after the onset of the hemorrhage. And this is mediated by the neutrophil. So the neuroinflammatory cascade generated by the neutrophil and generating further ischemia in the brain, edema, neuronal damage. And in the blue box, you can see what we have proven actually in the preclinical model. So the activity of BIOX-101. We don't increase the bleeding risk. We inhibit the neutrophil and the recruitment of the nets. In other words, we protect the neurons. We have an antithrombotic activity and no increase in the edema. So we went through a phase 1 trial with healthy volunteers, which was positive. Then we moved to a phase 2A trial, which is a safety trial. So that's a randomized open label. So the good news, we can see what's happening to the patient. Proof of concept study to evaluate safety first, safety tolerability, and efficacy among patients coming with a spontaneous ICH. And this is actually an IV perfusion. So we administer the drug during 48 hours to cover 72 hours, really the window where it is impossible for the physician really to give something to the patient. So we really confirm the safety of Biox 101. We did it after 8 patients, and now we're looking after 16, the interim report. And we are also exploring potential impact of Biox 101 on efficacy endpoints, secondary objective, looking to edema, neuroinflammation, mortality, functional outcome at different time points, brain ischemia, deep venous thrombosis. So one word about the market. It is, as you understood, a very nice market potential because the unmet medical need is very high. Again, there is nothing to treat the patient. 2 million cases a year worldwide, 200,000 cases a year if you combine US, Europe, the big 5 countries, and Japan. No competition, so you don't have to displace any competitor. You don't have to displace any medical intervention except for the very dramatic cases where they have to go through surgery. The market for pharma industry is very interesting because it is concentrated just in intensive care unit and a stroke unit, even in China. And we are looking to, as Bioxodes, we are looking to focus on US, EU, potentially Japan, and seeking partnership for China. Because in China, I spoke about 200,000 cases in US, EU, and Japan. In China, it's 800,000 cases a year. So it is a huge burden. It's the first cause of mortality and disability, stroke in general, in China. So if you take the realistic assumption, if you limit the geography to US, EU5, and Japan, you can easily generate $1.5 billion peak sales, annual sales. And if you add China and the rest of Europe, you can double very easily this potential. So also looking to exit, I took some example actually of a recent exit for rare disease. Again, here we are speaking about orphan disease, but that's a rare disease as well. And you can see that the potential is there to interest pharmaceutical industry. And we are, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, discussing already with quite a lot of pharma companies. Not all are on the slide here, and they are all waiting for the interim phase 2A results, which are going to be produced by the end of this quarter. At the very bottom of the slide, you see also the Chinese companies we are discussing with today. So, last slide, with regard to the financing, before moving to the Series B, we are looking to extend actually the Series A. We did the first pre-closing of the Series A with 12 million euros, and we are looking for 5 additional one. Why? Because we want to complete the Birch phase 2A study, but we want also to anticipate the phase 2B by blocking a slot at the CDMO level to produce the batch and a new formulation, because we have a new formulation stable at fridge temperature, so really, really friendly for the people working in ICU or in stroke unit. And the term is a convertible loan with a conversion at 30% discount to the Series B share price, and also an 8% annual interest, which will be convertible as well. The post-money valuation of the company today is more or less $34 million. That's, in a nutshell, what Bioxodes is and what is actually our investment opportunity. And as you can imagine, at the time we will have the first interim clinical data, we will have a jump in the company valuation. So this is an opportunity for investors to join the company today.
Great, great. So we have 2 questions for you. Do you have any
Sure.
large animal data? It seems everything works in mice so far.
Yeah, actually, we don't have a lot of validated intracerebral hemorrhage model. So we started actually to test the product in a different animal models, including pigs and monkeys. Just at the beginning, it was really for the antithrombotic activity. And then we moved to the only intracerebral hemorrhage model in mouse. And there, the results are very striking.
Great. And the next question is, what have you done with the 34 million euros so far? Can you describe the milestones you met with that?
Yeah, coming to what Herbert said, we are in a very, very strong ecosystem in Belgium since a long time. And so we are very well supported either with public investor. So we have the Federal Fund of Belgium, we have a local public investor, and we have a lot of high net worth individual, family office, and people, angels supporting the company today. And that's where the money is coming from.
Great. With that, we're at the end of our time. I want to thank you, Mark, for a great presentation. And with that, we'll move to our next presenter, Mike Sloan of Simple Labs. Mike, if you go ahead and launch your slides and kick off when ready. Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.